Hello again, gamers. Welcome back for another episode of Grokking Twilight Imperium. I'm the board game captain, and today I'm going to be showing you how to grok the Naalu Collective. So the Naalu Collective are the snake women. They are sneaky and full of subterfuge and really, really fast. And that's basically what their theme is and what they're all about. Now, these guys are generally considered to be a less powerful faction. So I'm going to be going in deep on everything they have and all their capabilities. I'm going to tell you whether or not I would recommend them to you to play in a game of Twilight Imperium. And also, I will tell you what are some of the best options for them when you are playing them. Now, to start with, before I get too deep into this, I do want to say I've got a ton of links in the description down below that you can check out at your leisure. There's a link to BoardGameCaptain.com, my website, which is a great hub for all things Board Game Captain, as well as a link to my Teespring store. You can get cool gamer gear, t-shirts like this one that say, hey, good looking, come to this dungeon often, as well as other shirts and mugs, etc. And there's also a link to my Patreon. If you're in a position to and like to support the channel, you can head over to my Patreon, link in the description down below. So, all right, the Naalu Collective. So, to start with, you have a 2-planet system with the Naalu Collective. You get the planets Maluk and Drula. Now, Maluk and Drula, it's a decent 2-planet system. This is actually one of the better things about what they start with. Drula is 3 resources, 1 influence, which makes it a really decent place to put your starting space dock because you'll have a production of 5, which is a good amount, and 3 resources, not a bad amount to go around with, and 1 influence if you need some more influence for things like the abilities from the leadership card. It's just good to have a little bit of extra influence and have that option. Now, Maluk is 2 influence, no resources. So this is obviously for specifically using for things like the leadership card or voting on agendas once you begin to have an agenda phase. Altogether, though, this is not a bad starting system, and this is a good way if you're going to have multiple planets to split it up, where you have all of the resources on a single planet to keep that production limit high. Now, next, I'd like to talk about what your starting fleet looks like with the Naalu Collective. So the Naalu Collective start with a carrier, a cruiser, and a dreadnought to help escort the carrier, which is really nice. They get 3 fighters and 4 ground troops, as well as a space dock and a PDS. Now, like I already said, the space dock is obviously going to go on Drula. Drua being the planet with 3 resources. So that's a no-brainer. That's where your space dock is going to go. This is not a very good starting colonizing fleet, though, even though you have a nice escort in the destroyer and the cruiser, which is going to help to protect your carrier if it gets close to enemy space. Generally speaking, this carrier is probably going to head out with, 2 or 3 ground troops and 1 or 2 fighters, also to help it escort it out. And then you're going to have to wait to build another carrier and some more some more other things to help escort it out to pick up the other ground troops and the other fighters that you didn't bring with the first carrier to help continue colonizing elsewhere. But the thing is, in round 1, you're only going to take 1 system. Now, granted, this ship could take a system of any size, because, again, you could put 2 or even 3 ground troops on there. So you could take a 1, 2, or 3 planet system. But that makes them one of the slower to colonize factions because there's nothing else in your starting fleet that could hold those other ground troops. You have enough ground troops, you just don't have the ability to move them out there. So that's a bit of a letdown. You're going to want to very quickly try to build more carriers and more ground troops and more fighters and send them out as quickly as possible. So that maybe your second round could be a really big colonizing round after your first round is pretty lackluster. So now let's talk about the starting abilities for the Naalu Collective. So the first ability on the Naalu Collective's card is Telepathic. Now this is a really interesting one. It's not going to be very useful early game, but once you start sharing borders with people, this can be a very powerful ability from about mid-game onwards. And that is Telepathic. At the end of the strategy phase, place the 0 token on your strategy card. You are first in initiative order. So there are many, many times that getting to go first, take the first action of a round, would be incredibly useful. You and an opponent are both adjacent to a very key planet, maybe a legendary planet, maybe Mechatol Rex itself. Getting to go first every round, meaning that you're going to be the one who's going to grab it and then hopefully be able to defend it, is pretty huge. It's a really, really cool ability. Also, sometimes there's reasons why you would really want to play strategy cards first, or really want to take certain other actions first. Maybe your opponent ended the round right on your border and you need to build a fleet to defend your area. Well, you go first, boom, you build the fleet, suddenly you don't look like such an easy target anymore. This is a really powerful ability and will definitely get used a lot. Now, the second ability is a little more situational. It's Foresight. After another player moves ships into a system that contains one or more of your ships, you may place one token from your strategy pool in an adjacent system that does not contain another player's ships. Move your ships from the active system into that system. So here's the thing. This allows you to retreat from a no-win situation. Your opponent's coming, they're trying to do a sneak attack, they're trying to come in and take out your flagship. Maybe you want to fall back so you can fall back into a system that has some support, some other ships there. This can be very useful to do that, but there's two problems with it, which in my opinion make it not quite as good as it could be. One is you have to use your tokens from the strategy pool, which means you're going to be a little limited on how many times you're going to be able to do this. And the other is the fact that since you put a token in that system, you can't then move right out of that system again. You're going to need to do warfare or some other trickery to get the token out of the system to be able to start mobilizing again. Not the worst ability in the game, but telepathic is definitely much more wow factor if you ask me. Now, I'd like to talk about the only faction-specific unit on their faction card, and that is their version of the fighter. So instead of a fighter, they have the Hybrid Crystal Fighter 1, which is the Naalu Collectus fighter. Now, the only difference between this and a standard fighter is that the Hybrid Crystal Fighter 1 has a combat of 8 instead of 9, meaning that it is literally twice as good at hitting the targets. This makes a fighter that really makes the destroyers in the Naalu Collective basically obsolete, because having a carrier with a couple fighters on it is better than having a few destroyers there, with the exception of the destroyer's anti-fighter barrage ability is really the only reason to have destroyers, and really only when facing enemy fleets or who also have tons of fighters. So generally speaking, I'd much rather build the cheaper fighters of getting 2 for 1 along with a carrier, which granted costs 3 but can hold 4 of them, than build some destroyers. Generally speaking, these fighters are great. Okay, so moving along, I want to talk about the agent, the commander, the hero, and the mech. So let's start with the agent. Now, the agent, of course, you always start with your agent ability at the very beginning of the game, so you can use it from turn 1. Now, the agent for the Naalu Collective is Zeu. A little hard to pronounce. Zeu's ability is after an agenda is revealed, you may exhaust this card to look at the top card of the agenda deck. Then you may show that card to one other player. This is one of the weakest, and I really mean that, one of the weakest agents in the game. I hate this agent. It's really lousy. So here's the thing. You can start using the agent from the very beginning of the game. Generally speaking, agendas don't get revealed until like mid-game, because they don't happen until the agenda phase gets triggered, which doesn't happen until like mid-game. So that's an issue right there. So the first few rounds you have this ability that you're just not going to use. And then once it happens, the ability is you get to look at the next one. Okay, what if you don't like that one? Well, the only real thing that's good about it is I guess you could save some votes for the other one if you like that one better and really want to vote on it, but there's no, if you don't like it, you can put it on the bottom of the deck, or if you don't like it, you can remove it from the game. It's just you get to look at it, and if you want, you can show one other person. Not a big fan of this agent. I feel like this agent's abilities are really big letdown. But now let's move on to the commander, because I do feel like the commander is pretty awesome. So the commander for the Naalu Collective is Ma'aban. Now, Ma'aban is unlocked when you have 12 fighters on the board. And as I've been talking a little bit about, their fighters are really awesome. These guys have the best fighters in the game. So, Ma'aban is going to be one you're going to pretty easily get out by mid-game, and then their ability is really good. It says, you may produce one additional fighter for the fighter's cost. these additional units do not count against your production limit. So when you make 2 fighters per normal, you get to make 1 extra one for free that doesn't count against the production limit. This is great, especially since their fighters are awesome. So this is going to be a very often used ability once you have Ma'aban, especially since fighters can have tokens to represent them. So they are not restricted by the number of plastic fighters you can have out there versus other ships. So this is a really great way to build swarms and swarms of fighters, which I know you're thinking, but you're limited by the number of carriers or carrying capacity ships. Not really, and I'm going to get to that in a minute when we talk about their faction-specific technologies. But moving on, we're going to talk about the hero. Now, the hero is the Oracle, Corrupted Mind, and they are unlocked when you have 3 objectives scored, just like all heroes. And once they are unlocked, they become Sea Radium Geometry, Poison of the Nephish. At the end of the status phase, you may force each other player to give you 1 promissory note from their hand if you do purge this card. Now, this can be really good, because there are some cool promissory notes out there. If one of your opponents is holding on to just 1 promissory note because they've traded others away and there's a really good one they have, this could be really awesome and could potentially be game-winning, because there are some amazing promissory notes out there. Also, there's a lot of trickery you can do for certain objectives that require you to have promissory notes from other players to be able to achieve those objectives. Is this the best hero ability in the game? No, but it's a good one, and I do enjoy it. It can be situationally quite good. And the larger of a game you're playing, the better it gets, because the more other players there are to give you promissory notes, the more powerful this will be. Now, next we have their mech. So the mech is the Iconoclast. It is 2 cost, 6 combat, sustained damage. So far, pretty standard. But here's where the awesomeness comes in. During a combat against an opponent who has at least 1 relic fragment, apply a +2 to the result of this unit's combat rolls. So suddenly, these become some of the most powerful ground units in the game. As long as your opponent has collected and hasn't gotten rid of them yet, 1 or more of those relic fragments, suddenly instead of a 6, these things hit on 4s. And again, with the sustained damage, they can take a hit and keep attacking and keep hitting on 4s. This is really awesome. These things will help you win invasions. Very, very powerful mechs. Definitely really good. Some of the best stuff for the Naalu Collective. So next I'd like to talk about the flagship for the Naalu Collective. So the flagship is the Matriarch. Now the Matriarch is 8 cost, 9 combat with 2 shots, not very good in the combat, 1 movement, 6 capacity. Really good on capacities. This is a big carrier. Not a big surprise for a faction that loves to use fighters. Now, it has sustained damage, just like all other flagships usually do. And then it says, during an invasion in this system, you may commit fighters to the planet as if they were ground forces. After combat, return those units to the space area. So here's the thing. I've checked the FAQ on this, and you unfortunately cannot take a planet with just fighters. You are going to need to at least have 1 or 2 ground troops of some kind, infantry, or their amazing mech. I recommend the mech. Throw a mech on the Matriarch, and then fill the rest of the space with fighters. So in space combat, you've got the best fighters in the game. Even with just the Fighter Mark 1s, the Hybrid Crystal Fighter Mark 1s, you're hitting on 8s, which is better than, destroyers. It's better than carriers. And if you have a lot of them, this thing has 6 capacity. So if you're holding, say, 5 fighters, that's 5 shots hitting on 8s. That's not too bad. Then, once combat is over, you can send them in and they will help win the ground combat. Again, you need to have a ground troop to take the planet, though, because of how they go right back to the space area after combat before you decide whether or not you've taken the planet. They are not able to take the planet on their own, and that is a very important note. So you will always need to have at least some infantry or some mechs with it, but this is a really cool ability. It will be situationally incredibly useful for taking important planets, because you can use a lot of those fighters hitting very powerfully to wipe out the ground troops on important planets. So this will definitely be good for your invasion fleet. And the thing is, you kind of want this with a couple of carriers also loaded up with fighters, because then all those fighters can go down, and you're, maybe one ground troop and one mech then can take the planet for you, and it's yours. But the fighters will win the war for you on the ground, because with this, with the one ground troop and one mech on it, let's say, and 4 fighters and 2 more carrier Mark 1s with 4 fighters each, that's 12 fighters, and that's crazy. And it's actually not that expensive to do that, because the carriers only cost 3 apiece. The Matriarch is going to be the most expensive thing at 8, but fighters are 2 for 1 resource. It's actually not that difficult to have this particular fleet going by mid to late game. Next, I want to talk about your starting technology. So you start with Sarween Tools and Neural Motivator. So Sarween Tools is a yellow tech that says when 1 or more of your units use production, reduce the combined cost of the produced units by 1. Okay, Sarween Tools is one of my favorite techs. It's one of my favorite starting techs. Getting free resources is really good, especially because we already talked about the fact that you're going to have a bit of a deficit with colonizing other planets. Getting some free resources to building fleets is going to be very decent. It's going to help you get some decent fleets going for round 2 to be able to spread out and colonize a lot of planets. The Neural Motivator is also good. It during the status phase, it lets you draw an extra action card. Extra action cards are good. Lots of action cards means lots of trickery and lots of cool stuff. These guys are all about trickery, so getting those lots of action cards are going to be really good for them. It's going to be very useful and help you to do some tricksy stuff. There are some great cards to get out there where you're going to throw swarms of fighters and enemy fleets, damage them, and hit them with direct hits, because you have drawing 2 extra action cards every round means you're going to get the better chance to get direct hit cards, as well as all sorts of other really cool cards. Yeah, those are, action cards can be really, really awesome. Those situational, but getting more of them means you're going to have more of a chance to find ones you're going to want to use. Now, next, before we talk about what technologies from the general deck I recommend, I want to talk about their faction-specific decks, because they're both really good, and there's going to be very much reasons why I'm going to recommend the other general decks based on the fact that they're going to help you get the prerequisites for the faction-specific decks. So the first faction-specific deck, and you're halfway to having its prerequisites, is the Hybrid Crystal Fighter 2, the upgrade of the Hybrid Crystal Fighter 1. So the Hybrid Crystal Fighter 2 requires you to have 1 green tech and 1 blue tech. Now you start with a green tech due to the Neural Motivator. So you're going to want to get a blue tech pretty quick, or you're going to want to place a planet with a blue technology prerequisite right adjacent to your home system so you can get this out as quick as possible, because these fighters are fantastic. You want to get this out round 1 if you can. And here's why. So they are 1 cost for 2, just like normal fighters. Their combat drops to a 7. Now, this means that you suddenly have the best fighters literally in the game. You have fighters that can hit as hard as cruisers. Cruisers cost 2 resources for 1 cruiser that hits on a 7, whereas these Hybrid Crystal Fighter 2s cost 1 for 2 fighters that hit on 7s. They have a movement of 2, and now the reason for that's going to become very clear, and once you get these out, you're probably never going to buy another cruiser again, because they have an ability that says this unit may move without being transported. Each fighter in excess of your ship's capacity counts as half of a ship against your fleet pool. So here's the thing. You can still use carriers to carry some of them that will then not count against your fleet pool, but you can also start having fleets of literally nothing but fighters. If you have 3 fleet supply, you can have fleets of, and listen to me here, you can have fleets of 6 fighters that hit on 7s or better. That's like a fleet of 6 cruisers. They're basically the same. They move 2, they hit on 7s. It's like having 6 cruiser Mark 1s in one system. These can be amazing for hit and run tactics, run in, decimate a fleet, completely annihilate a smaller colonizing fleet, or even really damage a bigger war fleet before your main fleet comes up to take them out with like your flagship or some dreadnoughts. But these become really decent, and once you get the Hybrid Crystal Fighter Mark 2s, I'm pretty sure you're never going to make cruisers again for the rest of the game, and you may not make destroyers again for the rest of the game unless you're facing someone else who uses a lot of fighters, because generally speaking, these are going to completely replace all of the cheaper ships. And also, since they're faster than carriers, with the exception of fleets that you're really going to want to have a ton of fighters in, like your fleet with your flagship, you're probably not going to make too many more carriers for fighter purposes anymore either, just for carrying ground troops, really. So there you have those Hybrid Crystal Fighter Mark 2s. phenomenal. Really, really good. Next, we have the Neural Glaive. Now, the Neural Glaive is a little tougher to get out. It requires you to have 3 green technologies. Now, you start with 1 green, so you're going to need to get at least 2 more. Or get some technology specialty planets. But its ability is worth it, and it's really awesome. This is definitely worthy of being a requiring of 3 green. It is a top tier level tech. After another player activates a system that contains 1 or more of your ships, that player removes 1 token from his fleet pool and returns it to his reinforcements. This becomes a massive disincentivizing technology to attacking you. When you're facing really powerful combat heavy fleets like, say, the Sardak Nor or the Barony of Letnev, even with your incredible fleets of fighters, with 6 fighters, you're not going to want to have to go toe-to-toe with these like crazy combat monstrosities. And when they do, if they decide to invade you, that whole having to give up a token from their fleet supply, literally having to shrink the size of their fleets right away, is a pretty big disincentive. And then you can combine that with the faction ability of Foresight to retreat, so that if it's not an important system, if it's a system you can let them have, they would then have to do it again to take your fleet. So like, if you're on the border, literally just protecting your area, they go to attack you, they lose a token from the fleet supply, you retreat back to where your planet systems are, maybe you were sitting in an empty system. If they want to attack you again, they're going to have to lose another token from fleet supply. This could be incredibly good, a great defensive technology. Now, next I'd like to talk about what technologies I recommend. So, first off, obviously, I need to recommend a blue tech to be able to get the Hybrid Crystal Fighter 2, which I highly recommend you get at some point during the game, and that is going to be Dark Energy Tap. Now, we're already talking about that these guys like to do lots of tricksy stuff, and remember, the Dark Energy Tap says, after you perform a tactical action in a system that contains a frontier token, you have 1 or more ships in that system, explore that token. Your ships can retreat into adjacent systems that do not contain other players' units, even if you have units or control planets in that system. Okay. So this is like a cheaper way of doing Foresight. It becomes really good to be able to retreat back to adjacent systems. That's awesome, but also, and more importantly, the being able to do all that exploration and explore those frontier tokens could possibly get you some of the wild relic fragments. It also could get you some amazing other things, including in that particular deck, there is a legendary planet you could find. There's lots of reasons you would want to use this to get lots of cool stuff. So being able to get this out, if you can, first round, so that maybe second round you could get out the Hybrid Crystal Fighter Mark IIs, would be really, really awesome. On the other hand, though, if you're able to get a blue technology specialty, it's actually fine to skip this so that first round you could get these out, because these are really, really great. Now, the green techs I recommend, if you're not able to get much or any of the green technology specialties to help you get out Neural Glaive, are as follows. So first off, I want to recommend Biostims. You may exhaust this card at the end of your turn to ready 1 of your planets that has a technology specialty or 1 of your other technologies. Now, I'm mainly talking about using this to ready planets that you've already spent or planets that you just obtained, because these guys are fighting a bit uphill in regard to getting lots of planets and lots of resources. You're going to want to spend some planets twice sometimes, and this is going to be really useful for that. Now, next, I'm going to talk about hypermetabolism. During the status phase, gain 3 command tokens instead of 2. This is really good for the Naalu Collective, because the Naalu Collective early on are going to want to use Foresight for retreating. That takes up some of their tokens, but because of them always getting to go first, there's not going to be a huge incentive to grabbing low number cards like Leadership that they may not want, when they can use the secondary ability on Leadership to get lots of more tokens also, though not quite as many, because they're always going to get to go first during taking their actions. So there's not as huge an incentive for the initiative of that number 1 card, because they get to turn their card into a number 0. So getting this even further reduces the need to get it, because you are able to gain extra command tokens, and extra command tokens are great. Having an extra command token that you gain at the end of every round will really help you out with the fact that you are going to be spending command tokens. And finally, once you've gotten these, you're going to be able to get the Neural Glaive out, but you also will have enough prerequisites to get the top tier green tech, which is a fantastic tech, X89 Bacterial Weapon. Action: exhaust this card and choose 1 planet in a system that contains 1 or more of your ships that have bombardment. Destroy all infantry on that planet. Now, if you do decide to get this, it's not a must-have, but it's an awesome ability. If you do decide to get this, you're going to want to have a few dreadnoughts out, and you're going to want to have them with your invasion fleets, because then you can literally wipe out everybody on the planet and take it on a whim, as long as you keep one of those dreadnoughts around to be able to deploy the X-89 bacterial weapon. Okay, so next let's talk about what strategy cards are good to go for. So early game, you're going to want to try to grab Warfare or Trade. Warfare will help you to speed up your colonization. It's going to help you to colonize extra planets, and that could be really useful. It could especially be useful if first you move all of this fleet that you can carry, including 2 of the ground troops, leave the other 2 behind, out to colonize a 2-planet system. Then you build in your home system, and you should have enough resources, even on round 1, to build another carrier. You've got another couple of ground troops there that you can pick up and take with you. You can use Warfare to either remove the token from your home system or from the other system to then be able to do another colonization. And then hopefully round 2 and on, you're starting to do multiple colonizations around. If you can grab Warfare first round, it'll really help you with your situation. On the other hand, grabbing Technology first round will be really helpful for grabbing some of those important techs that you want to get early game. These guys have a lot of techs they want to get. These are all really decent techs, and they want to get their fighters upgraded as soon as possible, because these guys are really all about these fighters. These fighters are really awesome. Getting the fighter, the Hybrid Crystal Fighter Mark IIs, is going to be really important for the Naalu Collective to do well. Then, of course, later game, in addition, there's going to be times when you're going to want to take Diplomacy to stop your opponent from attacking you. There's going to be times you're going to want to do trade to fill up commodities and do trades with other people. Technology and Warfare will stay high priority, and of course you're going to want to be able to do the ability of Imperial to score public objectives and gain victory points if you control Mechanol Rex, and of course also to be able to do the secondary ability of Imperial, and you can go looking for new secret objectives. So now there's not a huge number of secret objectives that work really well for the Naalu Collective, but let's go over the few that do. So first we have Master the Laws of Physics. Own 4 technologies of the same color. Now, including their faction-specific tech of Neural Glaive, I actually recommended 5 green techs to you. So this is something that will be very doable during the course of the game. Next, we have Form a Spy Network. Discard 5 action cards. You start with the ability to draw more action cards than most other players. Every round, you're going to be able to accumulate enough by mid-game to be able to achieve this objective. Next, we have Strengthen Bonds. Have another player's promissory note in your play area. As soon as you're able to release your hero and do their ability, you're going to get promissory notes, whether or not you're able to negotiate for ones earlier. If nobody wants to negotiate with you, you're going to force everybody to give you promissory notes. So this will happen. And finally, Betray a Friend. Win a combat against a player whose promissory note you had in your play area at the start of your tactical action. So again, this works really well with the hero ability. Once you've gotten everybody's promissory notes, there's probably someone you're fighting with and having a war with. You're going to wind up fighting them and having to give up your promissory note. And doing so, of course, will get you the Betray a Friend secret objective. So there you have it. All right, now, the thing about the Naalu Collective is that they have some very specific ways you can play them to possibly do well. They're not a top-tier threatening faction. They're not a faction that everyone's going to be afraid of. So this could lend itself well to being able to do a lot of negotiating, a lot of being able to do deals with other players, because the other players are not going to be deathly afraid of you. But once they see those big fleets of fighters flying on their own and being the equivalent of 6 cruisers, then you might start to really scare the crap out of some of the other players. That's going to be their ace in the hole, is getting those big fleets going. It's why you're going to want to get these out right away. But that said, for every awesome thing that the Naalu Collective have, they have something that's kind of crappy, like, for instance, their agent, Zailu. Now, these guys are a decent faction. They're not a top-tier faction. They could be a very interesting faction to try out because of how they play so differently from a lot of other factions with their swarms of fighters that don't need carriers, and that can be really interesting to try. But overall, I would definitely recommend them if you are a more advanced player and a player who wants a little bit of an extra challenge, because generally speaking, these are not the easiest faction to win with. But they can be really fun. And I especially, obviously, because I recommended it, like their whole concept of having these swarms of fighters. They're the only faction that's really able to do these giant swarms of fighters that don't need any carriers with them, to really like bring down other fairly combat heavy fleets, because having them all hit on par with cruisers is not bad. Granted, that fleet that I said, those 6 fighters, will not be able to invade planets unless they are going along with the flagship, but even then they're not able to take the planet. You still need some carriers and you still need some ground troops out there to be able to take the planets, but they do have some of the best mechs in the game. Their iconoclasts are really decent for that. So they've got a lot of very interesting things going for them. But they also have some Achilles heels. So they are a decent faction. They could be a fun faction. But I would not recommend these for anyone who's fairly new to the game, because they are definitely tough to do well with. So there you have it. There is my episode for the Naalu Collective. Let me know what you thought. Did I miss anything? Comment down below. And if you enjoyed this episode of Grokking Twilight Imperium and you'd like to see me do more like it, be sure to give this video a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Captain. That's Captain spelled with a K on YouTube. And until next time, game on.